YouTube, and welcome to another installment of the Educated Barbarian, and we're diving right into it. A lot of good things today. There's a lot of good paragraphs ahead of us. The vicissitudes of a man's experiences during his life cannot be attributed to matters of good and evil in his deportment. Changes in fortune occur naturally. Verdicts of good and evil depend on the worldly judgment of men. Still, notions of good bringing providence and bad begetting ruin are useful precepts for moral instruction. You could write a book about just these few sentences because it is amazing the ability Shoujo has of expressing what he has on his mind without being too worldly, too lengthy, and yet there is so much to unpack every single time. So here, he first off describes the idea that you cannot blame the good things or bad things that happen to you upon notions of good or evil. And if you want to extrapolate that notion, you cannot magnify good and evil into figures like God or the devil and say, oh, these things happen to me because one or the other. Without going too much into detail, as far as religion goes, a lot of religions, be them, ones of the old gods or the new religion that are Abrahamic, that we call Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all of these seek to explain things that happen to us through a figure, through a dynamic effort of someone or something. When in reality, most of those things that happened is just random, it's just statistics, it just happened. Nothing did that to you, it just happened. And after that, the issue with saying that someone did that to you is that you lose the ability to actually respond to that thing, to have ownership of that thing, and you're lost into the why. Because clearly, if there is a God somewhere that did that to you, why? Why you? You might even start doing efforts towards being a better person so that you can avoid God's punishment, but it's going to be misguided. You should have tried and secured the protection or defense against that thing that happened to you. You should have had countermeasures in place. And that's what he expresses in one sentence. As far as changes in fortune, they just happen. They're influenced by what you do, but sometimes you'll have something happen to you and there was no way to prevent it. After that, it's up to you to respond to it appropriately. And he explains that good and evil are just subjective. Good and evil do not exist in nature. A lion is not good or evil, they just are. And it's also what puts us above animals. That's why we're the dominant species, that we have the ability to project our own interpretation onto the wood. And you can call that literacy in a sense. When you write books or when you're able to express yourself, that's what you are. You're being literal. You're being worldly. You're actually expressing yourself through words that are the copy of your thoughts. And that's something that we're the only species that's able to do that. But he also explains, and that's a good thing, that we still need those notions of good and evil, good and bad, so that we can have and build a sense of morals. Now, whether you want to believe that's subjective or not, to me, that's not really the question. The question is that a good thing? Do you want society to follow morals? Overall, yes, because in reality, those morals are like laws. That's the reason why in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Quran, you have rules to follow. And those rules are supposed to help keep society together. Some of them don't, but most of them, that's what they do. They try to preserve the integrity of the group. And so that's purely subjective, but that's also a good thing. So you need that thing. And he says that here, that it's useful, there are useful precepts for moral instruction, because morality, it's a difficult question. Some people will tell you that we're moral by birth, that some people who have never been exposed to moral are still going to be doing the right thing. Issue is, everyone is exposed to moral at one point or the other. Unless you really grew up with wolves, but in that case, you don't even have a language, so how are we going to run tests on you? To me, it's always much easier to continue doing what we've always done, which is teach kids moral and grow them into good and kind adults, instead of just thinking, oh, let's try a society with no morals and see where it goes. Because the issue is that it would take a long time, and if it's bad, it's going to be bad for a long time. Citing the apparition of Morokai Koemon when he was summoned in front of the shogun, he had to sign a testimony. That man had to sign a testimony to make an oath, to prove that what he was saying was right. And he said to that, "A samurai's word is harder than metal. Once I have decided something, not even the gods can change it." To me, an excellent way to be someone of integrity, always uphold your words, always follow your promises, always honor any type of engagement you might have. You might find that it's tough because it's much easier to just be a weasel and change your mind all the time and betray people. But first off, people who know you after a while are going to recognize you as someone of integrity, and they are going to put their trust in you, which is a good thing. To be a leader, to be part of the group, it's important, and it's also important for you. If you've developed a mindset of iron and you know that you're never going to stray from the path and you're never going to betray yourself, it's feeding into your confidence. It's feeding into who you are, because you've stabilized yourself. You know who you are. And because you also know that you're not the type to change for someone else, it's a double effect, meaning that you're going to be steadfast for the rest of your life. And the beauty of it, and those words too, is that if you have the ability to say, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to weaken, I'm not going to change path, I'm going to achieve that, this is immensely important in your life. A lot of people waste a lot of time navigating, they change path, they find the path of least resistance, they always find reason to explain why they're not going to fulfill something. Just do it. Do it to the full extent, do it until it's done. Don't give up. Of course, that can be, it can develop a stubborn streak in you, but being stubborn can be dangerous for other people. It can sometimes put you in danger, but I find that to develop that characteristic, that personality trait, to a point where it becomes pathological and hurtful, it's quite complicated, and usually it's more of a perversion of what stubbornness is than a real gung-ho application of determination and never giving up. Quoting Ishida Ite, "If you wish for something strongly enough, it will eventually come to pass." This could be, it could be an early iteration of what we call today visualization, which is the action of thinking about something so much that it eventually comes to happen. Here, it's not really thinking about it, it's wishing for something. Now, I personally think that there's some truth to it because it happened in my life, but I always find that you cannot separate visualization with actual action. Meaning that it's nice to picture something in your mind, but you need to be working towards it. It's like prayer. When you pray, prayer should always be accompanied with action. You can't just wish for a better word. You need to be a better person yourself, and you need to work towards it. So some people sort of are misguided and they misinterpret what visualization is. It's the action of picturing yourself having something that is going to fuel the fire of actually working towards it. You can't just hope for it. You'll have to actually do it. This is in my list of predictions simply because people desire it. Make wishes for the times ahead and they will come true. So same thing in the same vein. He doesn't really express it, but what people desire, they tend to obtain. And usually the things that people desire that they can never get, it's usually because they desire something that's too great. It's nice to have big dreams, but you need to give yourself some time and some space to reach those dreams. You cannot try and project yourself in 20 years. Try to project yourself in 2 years. right? It's smaller steps, but at the end of the day, smaller steps build up, and they give you more of an ability to perceive where you're going, so that you don't get lost, right? So a lot of people who have the biggest dreams are also the people who do the less amount of things, because if I told you, hey, you have to climb a mountain that's, I don't know, 100,000 feet high, and you've never climbed the mountain, that's going to be impossible. But if we start with a smaller mountain and you scale back up, you're eventually going to reach that. And not only are you going to reach that dream, but even in between, you're going to have done much more, right? It's much better than someone who just one-shotted their dream, because you actually built up to it. This time it is Shoujo speaking. And he's talking about an anecdote where he had a conversation with a warrior. He says, he told me that a young warrior should be strong-headed. Consider this well. Pretty self-explanatory. When you're young, you're going to be more arrogant, you're going to be more boastful, and maybe more straightforward in a way. That being said, in terms of raw determination, I've personally, the people that I've met that were the most intimidating because they had that inner strength were usually older men in their 50s and 60s, men that never stopped walking, usually men who did martial arts or who trained their body. And it's just, they accumulated all of that confidence, and you can feel it when you talk to them. So as a young man, in a sense, you're not going to have that, but you should have the attitude of wanting that. You need to be ambitious in a sense, because if you're in your 20s and you've already settled and you've resigned yourself to a life of mediocrity, what is even the point of living? You've already given up and your life has barely started. A calculating man is a coward. This is because he considers everything from the perspective of loss and gain, and his mind never deviates from this track. To him, death is a loss, and life is a gain. He is afraid of death, which is why he is a disgrace. Moreover, erudite men consult their cowardice and avarice through their wit and glibness. Their cloak of deception tricks others into overestimating them. I've said that before, he talks about that a ton. What he calls a calculating man is someone who is going to weight the benefits and the risks at every turn of their life. And at the end of the day, that's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily being calculating, it's being smart. But there are certain moments in your life where you can't do that. And that's just my opinion. Some people might disagree. But if you're a man, you are born to protect. That's sort of your role within society. Society has evolved. Now you have certain people trying to tell you that it's not necessarily your role, your gender role, or whatever you want to call it. I don't buy into that. There's going to be people who are going to look up to you for protection, people who are going to be naturally weaker than you through biology, and to me you should provide them with that protection. Even if these same people might not like you, they might be antagonistic, they might even, in everyday life, in normal situations, resent you for the protection and the power that you have. You will find that when they meet trouble, all of that is going to fade away because it was just a facade. And when they reach out for help, you should help them. You shouldn't resent them for the potential poison that they spilled on you, because for the most part, they are manipulated. They don't know what they're doing. And times of need are going to let them realize that they really need you. After that, the perspective of loss and gain is interesting, because for Shoujo, Shoujo is saying that death is not a loss. It depends on the situation, but it's true that death is pretty much the end of the game, right? When you're dead, nothing can happen, which is why you should avoid death at all costs, and we're biologically wired to avoid death. But that being said, I also agree with the fact that life is not always a gain. You can live a life that is worse than death. It's tough, but it's doable. A life that is going to be completely devoid of any meaning is really similar to death in a sense. The only difference is that in death, you wouldn't be able to hurt other people. Some people live a life where the only thing they do is they're negative. So in terms of, global karma, they would be better off dead. And also he discusses being afraid of death, which you shouldn't be afraid of death. Death is going to come. You should try and avoid death, but avoiding something doesn't mean that you're afraid of it. Because if you're afraid of death, death is going to be on your mind all the time, and it's going to just destroy your quality of life. And that to him makes a man a disgrace, which, it's sort of cold-hearted, but I agree. And it especially becomes true in old age. Old people, there's a striking difference between old people who've accepted death and those who haven't. Those who haven't are usually scared, and they're a shadow of the man they used to be. And I personally don't want that for myself and for others because it's unsightly. After that, he discusses erudite men who consult their cowardice and avarice through their wit, which YouTube Fitness 101, anyone, the amount of people who have a PhD in like exercise science, but they look like twigs, too many to count. What is even the point? You're learning something you're not applying. It's as if you met someone who had, I don't know, a degree in aviation and they couldn't drive a plane or they couldn't construct a plane or repair a plane. Then what is the point? You just know a lot about planes. What are you going to do with that? Same for the body. It's great that you know so much about the best exercise and the best angles and the best practices, but how come you don't apply them to yourself? It's theory. It's the pen without the sword. It's not something you should pursue. And for the most part, as he says, these are people who are just not physical. They resent physicality. So they put all of their eggs into the spiritual basket, but they're missing something. And for the worst part of that is that they're not even willing to admit that they went wrong. They are just going to try and cover that by trying to shame people because they know less than they do, and that's just not good practices for anyone. And also a lot of people, usually it's novices, tend to overestimate these individuals because science, right, that great word that just bends anyone to its will. People who don't know much see someone who clearly knows a lot, and because that person is going to be very confident, because they have science to back them up, they're going to buy into it, and they might transform into that person too. Instead of training, instead of using their body to learn things, they're going to purely rely on their mind, and it's just not worth it. Shida Kishinosuke said, "If it won't damage your reputation whether you live or die, then you should live." This is an oxymoron, Shoujo says. He also said, when you wonder if you should go or not, don't go. When you wonder if you should eat or not, it is better not to eat. When you wonder if you should die or not, it is better to die. That quote was discussed before. I don't know really why it's been thrown into the mix again. The only new quote is, if it won't damage your reputation, whether you live or die, then you should live. Which is interesting, because it goes against what Shoujo says, but I'm not really sure if Shoujo is saying, this is an oxymoron, it is stupid, or it's an oxymoron, Kishinosuke doesn't really mean it, he's just poking fun. I don't know, but when you think about it, if you can avoid death and it won't hurt your reputation, Shida says, then don't die, which I sort of agree with. But Shoujo says, if the oxymoron definition is the one that I think he's applying here, what he's saying is, your reputation is not based on others. It doesn't matter if others think you're a coward, it's on you. How is it going to feel for you? You avoided death and you disgrace yourself, but disgrace is a social thing. Losing face, you lose face to the public. So if no one was there, did you really lose faith? It's an interesting question. At the end of the day, for me, the most important thing is, can you look at yourself in the mirror after what you've done? If you avoided death, but you let someone else die, can you look at yourself in the mirror? And if you can, what does that say about you? It is not sufficient just to remain calm in the event of catastrophe or emergency. When challenged by adversity, charge onwards with courage and jubilation. This is rising to a higher level. It is like the saying, the more water there is, the higher the boat raises. Really like this. An important lesson for anyone. When you are facing with difficulties in your life, by moping, by being sad, by feeling sorry for yourself, you're not doing anything to help the situation. You are just making it worse. Because you're matching your mindset with the color of the adversity you're facing. You don't want that. You can either feel antagonistic towards the event and feel hungry and angry and attack that thing, or you can even feel grateful for the challenge, because it's a challenge. It's life throwing a curveball at you. Are you going to let that ball just go past you and cry about it? Are you going to hit that ball and get a home run? It's all up to you. And I really like the word jubilation. It's joy. It's like a fierce happiness. And that's some more spiritual, but for Christians out there, you might have heard that God sent his toughest challenges to his strongest angels, or whatever the term is, meaning that if you're being tested, most likely you should be up for the challenge. And the more tests you receive, the more strong you are, because the more challenges you manage to actually accomplish and vanquish. Whether you believe in someone throwing these to you or not, at the end of the day, it's just life doing its thing. And the people who survive are the ones who are going to be able to attack the challenges with jubilation and courage. And it's rising to a higher level. You're improving yourself because you're proving to yourself and the world that you will not be broken. And after that, the saying, the more water there is, the higher the boat rises. It dives even deeper into that, because in reality what it means is, if there is no challenge, can you really be strong? In a peaceful world, can you be a warrior? Well, you can't, because the existence of the peril is what makes you a warrior. So the more water there is, the more challenge, the more your level is going to rise. Sort of the same for bodybuilding. The more you train, the more volume you do, the stronger you get, the bigger you get, because the more of a stress you give yourself, the more stressful the training environment is, but the more you're able to handle it and get bigger and bigger and stronger as the time goes. And that's going to be that for today. Today is going to be a shorter Educated Barbarian session, because next week we are starting with 116, and we're going to keep going forward and forward. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.